There's a cat over here. There's a cat over there. And the wrong one died. And the wrong one died.
Welcome to The Wrong Cat Died, the podcast breakdown of the catastrophe. I'm your host, Mike Abrams, and today we are celebrating Andrew Lloyd Webber. With Phantom of the Opera set to close on Broadway, I'm having a handful of what I'm calling Phantom Cats on the podcast. The guest today has been performing as Madame Giry on Phantom of the Opera, but before that, she was Grizabella in the Australian Circus Tour. So welcome, Maree Johnson. Thank you for joining me.
Good morning. Hi.
I am excited to have you on. I have not talked to anybody from your cast. And this tour is kind of fascinating to read about. So we'll get into that a little bit. But I always love starting with your history of Cats before you were in it. So, you know, being in it in 2000, the 98 movie had kind of just come out. It was probably just circulating a little bit at that point. But had you had a chance, like, what was your experience with Cats before being in it? Had you seen it? Had you, got to see it live? Like, where were you before you got cast as Grizabella?
I was in Sydney, Australia, and I remember seeing it. It was the original production in the 80s, I guess, mid to late 80s, I think, because it was before Les Mis, so somewhere there. You probably know those bits of Cats trivia, but so I was a young and, wide-eyed, and I thought it was amazing. I never imagined myself being in it, because I wasn't a trained dancer, and I think the biggest takeaway from that was the dancing, and I was just in awe of what they were doing in the set and how the set, came into the audience and how all the cats came up and, purred beside you in the show. So I was flabbergasted, actually. I hadn't seen anything like it at the time.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because it is such a dance heavy show, but then it has this such a memorable belt. And so it's kind of unique to hear. Like, I hadn't thought about it from that way as someone who can't sing or dance. So I walked out thinking, I can't do any of this. But to hear you say, like, I'm not a dancer, this isn't for me, versus I'm a singer, can do this, especially with an opera background. Like, I could do some of this stuff, but you had the reverse reaction because of the dancing.
Yeah, I was intimidated by it, and I was just starting out. I was, 18 or something, or see, I was also not really going into theatre at the time. It was more of a hobby, so I was pretty much intimidated by it. But what it did, I think, was gave me enough of a bit more of the bug to perform, and because it was different. It wasn't your Oklahoma. It wasn't, I just come out of school doing The Boyfriend and Bye Bye Birdie and Oklahoma. It was that kind of genre. So, and we're talking last century, in the 80s, the late 80s, so theatre was shifting then. So this was considered, very avant-garde at the time. So, it certainly got my creative juices flowing, that's for sure. But did I ever see myself in it at that time? Absolutely not. And nor was I was too young to be a Grizabella then. You have to age.
I guess that's true. There's been a wide range of aged Grizabellas, but it's generally supposed to be played by you're playing a weathered actress role as like the idea, as like that's the concept of Grizabella. So it's a little easier to do that later on. So you said that you were, that you weren't really fully into theater. Tell me a little bit about how becoming Grizabella happened, because you were a guest to come in for, I think, a month on this tour, correct?
Yes. So I was a guest for this leg of the tour. It was Perth and Kalgoorlie and a couple of other towns, I think, in Western Australia. Kalgoorlie is really remote. If you don't know Kalgoorlie, it's in the middle of Western Australia. It's an old gold mining town. So that was pretty cool to see that part of Australia. I just came in. So the cast was already up and running, and they'd already been touring for some months. And then they were going to continue on with the tour. And then I just, came back out, and I was Delia Hanna, who was the original Grizabella on that tour. So I just came in for those, I think maybe 6 weeks or something. I kind of remember such a long time ago.
Yeah.
So I had my own rehearsals in Sydney for a little while with the choreographer and director. So it kind of helps with the role of Grizabella, because she's the outcast.
Mm-hmm.
So coming into that company as a guest performer or as a solo artist sort of makes sense, and it helps with, I had to get to know everyone, and you feel a little bit on the outer, and you feel different to everyone else, and all that feeds into your characterization of the role. Will they like me? Will I be accepted into the company? And, so, it wasn't really an issue for me, but I'm not sure I really thought about it too much. You just sort of get on with the job and put your head down and get in there. And, and you kind of do a quick rehearsal with everyone, and that's it. But it was an extraordinary production, because it was a circus tent. It was like the Cirque du Soleil tents. And then I believe after I left, a couple of months later, there was a hurricane and it took it out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to a couple pieces here, because you said a couple of things I have a lot of further questions on. So we'll take them one at a time. The first is that, the Grizabella coming in is almost, it seems like that's part of the intention, even when, when you're doing rehearsals for the new show, is they kind of keep Grizabella out a little bit of some of the dance stuff and the stuff to bring her in for that moment. So it almost was kind of forced upon you in just the circumstance, but it also helped. But one thing I've heard from a few Grizabellas is that when you go into that first time where you rehearse with the whole cast and you sing Memory, there's almost a little bit of pressure. It feels like, because you haven't been with them the whole time, they have built this kind of family intentionally to kind of keep you out of it. And then you're going in to kind of have that moment. Did you feel that the first time you did the full rehearsal when you came in with Memory? Was there like a little extra pressure to perform the song super well, having been on the outside coming in?
Sure, absolutely. Back then too, I don't know if they still do this now, and it's probably something depending on how well your negotiations go. But often the Grizabellas do actually dance in the opening number, which I did. So that also plays into the Grizabella's sort of history, is that she was one of them. She started out as a young cat like them, and well, in my mind she did. And then she goes to live her life, and then she returns to the pack. So yes, coming in and singing that moment, because it's also a very quiet moment. It's a very still moment, and everyone's watching you. So there's always that trepidation.
Yeah, it is a very haunting moment. It's a moment where, in 2000 was an issue, but now there's a few shows I've seen where that moment of like, oh, please, I just really am hoping nobody's cell phone goes off, because it's like it's so ready. Like the moment is just so eerie and powerful. And so it is exactly that. I want to talk a little bit more about the circus tour, because it does, again, this came from, it was a circular theater. As you said, there's some circus elements. It was called Cats Run Away to the Circus. Like, how much like difference is there for doing it in that type of circular theater compared to, what I mean, I'm just fascinated by this because it's so opposite of what I saw seeing the 2016 Broadway revival.
Right. It was cool. It was really extraordinary. The tent, I mean, I can't remember how many semi-trailers this whole thing traveled in. Maybe, 6, I'm guessing. We had 2 of them that turned into dressing rooms at the back, and another 2, well, that's 4. So there must be it's probably 10. But 2 of the back loads of the trucks were the air conditioning units, pumping air into the tent. Wow. Because we're also talking Australia in summer. It's hot.
Yeah.
So you had that. And then you had these two other big trucks, maybe two or three, that the sides expanded out, and they were our dressing rooms at the back. And then the tent kind of shrouded all of that. And then you had, you know, a number of tent poles going up, creating, I don't know if you have seen pictures online, but it almost looks, it's black. The tent's also black.
Yeah.
And you've got these tent poles going up that kind of look like cats, you know, ears. You can almost say that. And we would enter, so like a circus, you've got the vomitarians coming in. So we would come up these ramps into the audience and come through the audience at the back, which is similar to the theatre, but it's a very dramatic entrance coming in that way through those entrances in a circus sort of thing. And I would come, Grizabella's first entrance was through that way and then up onto the stage. And then when she went, well, hopefully I'm not giving it away too early in the interview, but Grizabella would then go on up to the heavy side layer, and we'd go up on this sort of old tire as normal. And then I was in a harness, and I would have to climb down a very tall tent pole.
Wow.
There was almost like a little trapeze thing at the top that you would go onto a landing and then climb down.
That's how you, after you went up every night, you climb back down for the ending?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. It's the heaviside layer answers are always like, it's different in every production. Like how do you go up and how do you come back down? And I was thinking a little bit about the tent of, you know, it was a 5,000 in some places person, like stadium seating. Like there's so many, it's a big audience compared to a normal theater in most cases. And then you add in the circular element where you can't kind of have to go up and then hide behind. Like it's, you know, it's a much more challenging piece. And so when I heard about this one, I thought a lot about the junkyard elements and how do you put that together and how you're able to kind of almost make a little bit more use of the stage and different things you could do, because it does fit the whole point of Cats is that you're getting a sneak peek into the Jellicle tribe and the life of them, and you add in like the circular element. It's like, oh, you really get a sneak peek in versus the very traditional, you know, stage one look with who knows what's behind them.
Right. Yes. And it'd be interesting actually, you know, talking to some of the cast again who are on that tour for the long haul of it, because I'm sure they have a lot more memory of the details of that set, because I didn't crawl around that set the way they did.
Yeah.
You know, I just kind of came on from a distance, stood there, sang my song, and then thank you very much, goodbye.
Yep. Yeah.
So my memory of the intricate details is somewhat limited.
Yeah, and you know, it's awesome. Exactly. It's been a little time too, so it's, you know, there's been time and the amount of time you did it, because I think you were on for, like you said, 6 weeks. So let's pivot to that actually piece of that, which is when you're doing the 6 weeks. I know you said you had rehearsals in Sydney. How much do you create of a character backstory where you're given so little when you know you're doing a short stint? Like you have to clearly have enough to be able to go do the performance and give, you know, what Grizabella is to the audience. But how much did you think about that when you know it's a shorter run versus when it's an indefinite run? Oh,
it's the same. It's exactly the same for me. Yeah, if you still do your research and do your homework on where your character, any sort of information you can get about the character. So I'd actually studied a little bit of TS Eliot at school. So, you know, I'd been introduced to his work already. So it was just a matter of looking at the cats, the poems, and, you know, the lyric and where she was coming from, the glamour cat and all those things. I mean, it's kind of the classic tale of someone's life who is, you know, it's lost the glamour and the luster. Maybe there were mistakes made, regrets, all those things. And it's somewhat sordid. There's an implication that, you know, her life was somewhat complicated. you know, in various ways, and she was shunned by her community. So, you know, I definitely looked at that, but having T.S. Eliot's work there, was definitely something I tapped into. You know, those stories, those poems. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you remember what they told you? Because like there is this like lure of cats. I'm working my way slowly into getting the right people to come tell me the full like total background, like the 2 day that they walk through. But there is this like, here's what we know is fact, and here's where there's kind of some opportunity for interpretation. And like how much time do they spend walking you through that versus what I assume is more traditional rehearsal, which is here's your staging, here's where you come on, here's how you go to the heaviside layer, here's the song that you're singing. How much of that like time did you get, and how much do you remember of that?
I don't remember there being a lot of time, actually. It was because, especially coming in when the show's already running, those rehearsals tend to be a little, there's a little bit more economy of time going on. So it's more get the staging in first and then bring in the other layers as we go. But I don't remember a lot of the specifics. I wish I could find my notes. I know they're somewhere in some box, maybe still in Australia, who knows. But yeah, it's hard to answer that one apart from doing my own. I think as an actor, to be prepared as you can, you always do your extra work, you know, but I don't remember there being specifically some sort of backstory that they thought I should have. I think it was pretty much left to me because it is sort of it's a little bit like Madame Giry in a way too, in Phantom.
Yeah. So we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Well, hold that thought. I think you're spot on. I've always fascinated talking to Grizabellas, and there's always two pieces of Grizabellas that I like talking about and hearing from. And you know, the first is which is there is this almost ambiguous piece of where she went when she left. Like we're not really privy to that. We know that she was there before. We know that she left, and we know she's coming back because it's time, like it's her time. But where she went is like very open for interpretation. And there's like some theories, and there's some like, this is what I thought, and this is how I thought about it. But it's almost not like necessary to be relevant for the story. But did you at all think about that? Like, is that something where it's like, here's where Grizabella is coming back from because I'm returning? Or was it just, you know, we knew that she had to leave, we had this like, or was it more, I guess, broad?
It was probably a little more broad in the sense of, and I think as you get to know the cast and the other characters around you, that starts to develop within your rehearsal time. Once again, I didn't quite have that rehearsal time with the cast, so it developed probably on stage over a matter of days with the performances. So you start connecting, and when you're on stage, depending on the staging, you know, it's that look, it's that, and watching that other performer, then sometimes that backstory develops in that moment. And then it becomes a lot more colorful and vivid in your imagination. So it feeds your performance that way. So definitely that's something that I've always relied on, is letting other characters help me make my story. Yeah. You know, depending on my relationship with them on stage, you know, because their interpretation, they bring their own interpretation, and that feeds into your own story and your reaction to them. Yeah. So completely. I think it was a combination of your own history and your own vision of what it was to be, you know, someone who was probably at the pinnacle of her career. And then either over time, she just became sort of she aged out and then became depressed and sad, or there was some massive scandal and she was shunned. You know, I can't remember if I had that kind of detail with it, given the time that I was there to kind of pull it all together and get on stage. But
that's a much more wholesome version than most of the time I hear. A lot of times it's very drugs or sex work or something else too is like went really far off. Whereas I think I like I like the performer version. Like there's a slight scandal, was a little, like nothing is bad. So.
Well, I guess we're living in a world though now where I'm very careful of the way we judge people because some people make very successful careers out of being sex workers. So
totally, yeah. And it's yeah, and it's just like one of those fun pieces of this story for me is that it is kind of a dark show when you like really dig into it, and it's weird because there's kids everywhere and it's it's still cats and but when you kind of break down some of the stuff, it's like, I hadn't thought about it that way, and it's it's very sexual and there's a lot of pieces to it and there's a lot of backstories to it, but at the end of the day it's just cats, and so it's kind of like a funny piece too, and why I've got 100 episodes of the show is because of those stories that have been able to come from it.
Right. Well, and there's also, like if you look at TS Eliot too and start going into, Love Song for Alfred J. Prufrock, it's also the decline of someone getting older and their loss of self and all those things. So it could be just as simple as it may not be all about drugs and sex and it just aging and decline, and some people handle that better than others.
Yeah.
But yeah.
The other piece I want to ask, and this will transition nicely into a little bit of our Phantom conversation. But one part of that's I think really unique about Grizabella is you really get about 15-ish minutes on stage to tell your story, versus in Phantom you're on a lot more frequently. How do you prepare differently? Like, did you think about that differently when you're going to be really coming in to have your couple powerful moments? I guess maybe with the dance number at the beginning, but you come in and like, all eyes on you, belting and then leave, versus being a little bit more like throughout the story weaved in.
Oh, but when she first comes on, she's very, she doesn't come on with a full force. She's still, she's just reaching out. It's very gentle. She doesn't let rip at all. At the beginning, at that first.
Yeah, but all eyes are still really on you there, because it's like, ooh, who is this? Like the music changes, the tone changes, like everybody's kind of looking at you. And then you go back off and then you come back on and belt. Yeah.
Well, and then that's her whole emotional journey in that song. It's the pain and the, it's a great sing. It really is. It's a great journey, that song, so. It all gets wrapped up in the end in the 11 o'clock number. Yeah.
So do you prep differently though when it's going to be a shorter time on stage versus kind of in and out throughout the whole show?
No,
same thing.
Same. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Love it.
We'll be back for more of this catastrophe after a short break.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Phantom now. We're going to be releasing this right around the end of the Broadway run. I love hearing just a little bit from your side. Like, these are two Andrew Lloyd Webber shows that could not be more different from each other. And having had the joy of being able to be in both of them, like, what did you notice? Were there any parallels that you noticed or any similarities you noticed outside of like the very obvious vast differences in the stories?
That's a good question. No, other than, I guess, Madame Giry and Mr. Mistopheles wearing black, they kind of look a little similar.
Okay. I don't think I've ever compared those two in my life. I've never thought about it that way.
Well, if you look at their kind of costuming, and he's got black and a little bit of sparkle, and Madame Giry wears a little bit of sparkle in Masquerade. It's like, that could be a funny little, takeaway, is putting Madame Giry up there kind of choreographing Mr. Mistopheles because, he's such an incredible dancer and she's the choreographer. So I always think, that could be cute. But this, in terms of similarities, no, I don't. They're not. I think they are very different.
Did you? Yeah, I had a lot of trouble. So I readily admit that I had not seen Phantom until recently and didn't know very little about it. Just knew it was super famous and it was Andrew Lloyd Webber and everything else. But being a more theater outsider than insider, it was still something that was on my New York bucket list to do, and it was didn't happen. So I was, now that I know Cats so well, I can always try to take parallels, and I had the same thought. Like I really struggled to compare characters. Like the closest I got would be the Phantom and maybe Macavity, with like the eeriness of like little haunting type of stuff, but there's not nearly the same parallels as you get with Cats and some other shows where it's very easy to interpret them, because the thing that is unique about Cats is there's pretty much a personality type for every personality, and that's kind of the joy of having a whole Jellicle family together. But I really struggled to tie them to the Phantom characters, and they're just such vastly different shows. But it's unique because it's cool, some of the parallels in the sense of like they're both Andrew Lloyd Webber and they both ran forever. Like they've both been around for so long and so successful, but are so different.
Yes, definitely. And one's a much more classical score, that demands a different type of vocal, ability. So that immediately sets them apart too. And not as much dance. Well, for the ballerinas, there's definitely their choreography, but it's not, Cats is also essentially a dance show too.
Mm-hmm. So I want to go back to one of the very first things you said, which was that, you saw Cats and you were like, this is so dance heavy. You never thought it was going to be for you. Did you, the first time you saw Phantom, immediately say, I need to be in this? Like, this is for me?
Yes. Exactly.
You knew, you knew right away. Okay.
Yeah.
And what was this, I guess... Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, just jumping in. It was actually Les Mis before that. So that was another sort of defining moment when I saw Les Mis. I was like, this I can do, because there's not a lot of dancing in it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be Eponine. I thought I was an Eponine, but I actually was cast as a corset understudy. And I was like, oh, okay. And so interesting, sometimes your perception of who you want to be and who you actually present, or what your chemistry is a little bit different to what you think it is when you're young, But and then
fast forward to Phantom. So what was that experience like when you got cast on Broadway and you're going up there doing the show that you kind of knew? Like, what was that first time like?
Oh, that was really exciting. That was thrilling. But it was very, it's so nostalgic, because to age into, 20-something, 25 years later, whatever it is now, keeps time ticking away. I'm losing track of the years.
Yeah.
But to have played Christine, and then you say goodbye to that part of your career, which was awesome. And it just gave me such confidence and experience, and I really, really matured as a performer doing that role. And it opened so many doors, both, personally and professionally. And then, you say goodbye, and that's great, and you do other great things, and life goes on. And then to come back to it and on Broadway, was awesome. In some ways, it was also looking over my shoulder going, pinching myself, really just pinching myself. Is this really happening? And then, but just, going along with the ride was awesome. And that was another sort of situation where I was rehearsing on my own, because I was coming into a cast that was already up and running. And then you slip in there and get on with it, and your character then starts to develop based on those people around you and what they're doing around you and how you react to them. So the work is continuous, really. I always like to keep thinking and challenging myself as a performer. Even now, I'm coming on to 5 years with the show, including the pandemic. I'm still looking for those moments, or that thought process, that of why I'm doing what I'm doing at this moment in time. I mean, I'm not analyzing it quite like that on stage in the moment, but it's how you keep repeating it and not going crazy, is to keep it fresh and to keep unraveling the story.
Yeah, you kind of have to do that too, right? Because the audience, for most people, it's probably the one time they're going to see it, or especially Phantom and Cats, where it's a lot more tourists coming in versus, the everyone in New York just going to see it. But if you're going to see it once and then you're going to come back, there's a lot of people that come see it many times. You don't want it to feel robotic. And when you do it 8 times a week, you have to come up with some ways to make some of that so it's fresh for you. Like, so it's I can't fathom, again, as someone who's not in this industry, does not perform, to do the same thing 8 times a week over and over and over and over again. Like, you kind of have to do some of those different interactions and moments to keep it fresh. And I think, maybe now with, all the different protocols and a lot more ins and outs, like having a swing probably also helps because you get a little bit of a different take on it for that day and stuff like that.
Yeah, this is it. Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. That changes things so much. And it's actually, sometimes it's just, and most of the time it's great. It really keeps you fresh. Mm-hmm. And there are moments sometimes you discover and you think, oh, wow, I never thought of it that way. And, it just flips it. Not that anyone else out the front would really notice the difference, or even, the creatives that would notice the difference, but maybe the energy just shifts a little bit. So it just gives you a little bit of, a little shot of adrenaline, and it just brings it to another level, and, off you go. So, it is, it's great having the understudies and standbys on more often. It really is.
So before we get to the rapid fire, I know one thing you kind of said before we started is you might have some questions for me. So what questions do you have for me before we get into the $1 million questions here at the end?
Oh, the rapid fire. You got me nervous. Okay. But questions for you. I was kind of curious. So why do you think Grizabella shouldn't go to the heavyside layer?
Ooh, okay.
Because I haven't listened to, or no offense meant, I haven't been at time with 8 shows a week.
A little busy.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's your backstory on why you think she doesn't deserve to go there? Okay. Not that I'm insulted, but go on.
Okay. So let's do this then. We're going to go rapid fire. And then when we get to that last question, I will go first, giving you my answer and reason why.
Okay. Great.
So the rapid fire questions are very easy and fun. So my first rapid fire question is, if you could go on for one day, ignore ability, age, male, female, if you could go on to play one cat for one night only and you just immediately could do it, who would you want to perform one night as?
Probably Mr. Mistopheles.
Mistopheles. Do the turns and everything. I love it.
Yeah, I want to do all that. I want to be able to dance like that.
Who are your favorite and least favorite cats? Character-wise, not obviously performers.
Oh, no, I like them all. I can't say that.
No favorites?
Them all. Oh, I think Rum Tug, maybe because he's so funny.
Tugger's favorite. Okay.
Oh, I don't know. And Mungo, Jerry and Rumpleteazer, when they do that number, I love that. That's so cute.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's okay, they all got such, yep.
I'll let you off the hook with no least favorite then. What is your favorite song from Cats?
Memory.
Memory. Yeah. I mean, it's a classic. It's the one I knew going in, and, didn't even know it was in the show and just walked. I was like, oh, I know this song. Which cat do you think, this is my phantom question, if one cat would be haunting a theater in their afterlife, after they're the Jellicle choice, who do you think would be the best at haunting a theater?
Oh, well, Grizabella.
Grizabella, yeah. She's ready to, yeah.
Can't you just see her all in white and just creeping around, lurking in the corner and just being, she'd make a great sort of ghost-like, just trying, that, I think she's that image of her.
I have asked so far, you're the fourth of your Phantom family I've asked that question to. You were the first Grizabella answer.
Oh, that's
which is interesting. Yeah.
I'm a little biased.
A little biased. Well, that's not going to go well for my last question. So my last question is, I don't think that Grizabella is the right choice. So I will give you my answer, and then I would like to hear your I'm assuming defense of Grizabella, unless you want to defend somewhere else. So I'll give you the two answers. There was the funny, humorous, this is how this podcast started answer, and then there's where I actually kind of firmly believe right now, after talking to different cast members, hearing their thoughts on it. The funny was, I saw 2016 and I saw Leona Lewis, who I knew from the X Factor. That was how I knew her. She was playing Grizabella in the beginning of the revival in 2016. I knew nothing about cats. I knew nothing about the show. I knew nothing about what I was going to go see. I saw a matinee preview where someone who worked in theater gave me free tickets, and I found out like the day before I was going and just showed up there. And I thought, this seems like the X Factor. And maybe it was because I was thinking about Leona Lewis, and that was like in my subconscious, but I thought I was watching a singing competition because each cat comes out and basically gives me a little of the backstory, like the show, and then they sing their number. And then I'm like, wait, at the end, one wins, right? Like they make their choice. So I treated it as a weird X Factor, you know, like a cat's based X Factor. And if I'm judging as a vote for the audience at home, I would take the X Factor route, which is Simon Cowell likes to take 2 or 3 of the characters of the performers that were soloists and make them a group. That's how you got One Direction, Fifth Harmony, a couple of these like very famous bands came from the X Factor. So I wanted to send Tugger and Mistopheles together because I feel like they had a little Bert and Ernie vibe. I enjoyed their performances for very different reasons. I thought Tugger's was so fun and energetic, and Tyler Haynes was just phenomenal to watch do it. And it was like, wow, this is really rock starish. And then you've got Mistopheles, and you've got this like wonderful dance and just like very beautiful kind of number. They've got that weird chemistry together. I was like, this is going to be the duo. So that was my kind of like, that was my joke for a long time. I really think, though, like when I think back to as I'm old Deuteronomy and I'm making this decision every year, and my argument for Grizabella is she's her redemption story and her arc. I struggle with having her come back to be accepted by her family and then immediately killed off from her family. Like I want her to go spend a year. Like I want her to be next year's choice. To come back. Go to the, you know, come join your family, spend time with, if Victoria is your daughter, spend time with your daughter, depending on how you play it. Go spend time with the Jellicles for a year. They've accepted you back. Go enjoy that. And then be next year's choice. Send Gus this year, looks like he's on his last leg and needs to go. So those are my arguments for it. But I'd love to hear are you going to defend Grizabella, or are you going to pick somebody else, or are you going to follow my X Factor craziness?
They're all really entertaining. I love them. I love the X Factor one. I haven't heard that. That's great. It is a bit of a competition up there, isn't it? The cats all kind of competing. So I get that. As we say in Australia, I have to stick to my guns that I think it's Grizabella who deserves to go there. Maybe because my backstory on her is that she's tired. It's time. Her 9 lives. She's lived all her 9 lives, you know, and it's an old dude. I mean, you know, yes, but he's got a good heart, which is going to keep ticking.
You don't think Grizabella will make it next year? Like she won't make it through the year if we keep her. No. And I think she's made her peace and everyone's accepted her. And she's already been a part of their lives. She doesn't need to relive and go back. She needs to now go to sleep and go to the next layer of life or spirituality. She's reached that. She's paid her dues, I think. I have thought a lot about it, even in my X Factor piece of who's voting, you know, and they always do the little package before they sing their song of like the backstory. And I have wondered, like, I think Grizabella's package before her song would be pretty compelling. Like, you know, you'd be able to talk about her scandal or whatever happened before and how she's now, you know, being accepted again, and then she's going to go belt memory. And I'm like, will the people vote for her over the two young guys who are kind of fun? I'm like, just depends on who's watching the show, the demographics these days.
Well, and they're too young. The rest of the cats are all too young. They're only on their 2nd or 3rd life. They've still got, you know, or maybe or 6 or 7. They've still got a long way to go. But you know, she's been punished for her mistakes and shunned or whatever, you know, her indiscretions. And they've judged her and they've, you know, they excommunicated her. So now we're looking at compassion and empathy and acceptance. And, I like to go down that path of forgiveness. I think forgiveness is a huge thing in life. And the fact that they all forgive her, I feel like there's some level of forgiveness in accepting her and bringing her back. But yeah, she deserves it.
Yeah, I do. Peace. Again, I appreciate your more wholesome vision of this compared to some of the other ways. Like I do, like the first time I saw it, I'm like, wait, they're going to kill a cat at the end here? Like that's the reward. Like that seems a little strange. Like there's some strange pieces to this if you like really dig deep, versus yours. Like I love the acceptance and redemption, all that stuff. I totally get. But I'm like, but then why are we killing her? You know, like why are we gonna sacrifice her as our choice this year? But it's fun. I think Gus is the one that because of age and circumstance is the most commonly argued non-Grizabella choice.
Right. Oh, yes, Gus is on his true. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been so fun. How can people stay in touch with you? Social media, websites? Like, what's the best way for people to keep up with you?
Yeah. I have a website. It's a little dusty. I need to add some things to it. I haven't got around to doing it. And I have social media, Instagram, Maree Johnson actor, and I post on and off. Sometimes I'm really good at posting, sometimes I'm not. And that's kind of it. I don't do Twitter or anything else. Or I'm old, Sometimes I like social media, sometimes I don't.
No, it's a good and bad. I'm not even positive Twitter will be around by the time we launch this episode.
Oh, I know. Oh my God. There'll just be something else.
It'll be something new, exactly. Well, thank you so much for being an amazing guest. It's so fun.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. I'm very grateful. Thanks.
And thanks everyone else for listening to this episode of The Wrong Cat Died, the podcast breakdown of catastrophe. To follow along, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or anywhere else you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok at The Wrong Cat Died, or check out our website, thewrongcatdied.com.